So yeah, you can take tours of it. It look like they're like private companies that have arrangements with that allow.
Preservationists like to talk about view sheds. And a view shed essentially is a building's context, but not in an urban sense. So if you go to see a plantation, and a view shed would be anything visible from
the building.
From the building that would not, that at the time of construction would not have been built on. You want to preserve that view in perpetuity so that from the structure you would see the land in the way that the architect and the owner would have seen it in at the construction.
So yeah, this wanders into my old stomping grounds of Section 106 review.
Correct.
Which is the federal program that sort of regulates federally funded projects and their impact upon historic sites. Mm-hmm. So essentially, as Adrienne just described, you wouldn't want to plunk down a cell phone tower and the view shed of a plantation, because that's not what would have been there to begin with.
And this came up when we were talking about Taliesin West. So while it was being built, they installed power lines. So Frank Lloyd Wright turned his back on the more populated areas of Scottsdale because of the power lines. And then, so the focus was more towards the mountains. But then in modern day, far after his death, there's like cell towers all over. So it's kind of, technology gets the last laugh. Anyway, sorry, view sheds. Preservationists like to talk about view sheds, and the monumentality of this modernist structure is definitely reinforced by the lack of structures adjacent to it. There are other buildings on the lake that flank the assembly building, but it rises unchallenged from the water and far taller than the other things around it, and can be seen from all directions. Moving to a street view, it is difficult for a pedestrian to get anywhere near the building. It sits in flat parkland, no gardens, no distinguishing features, just a giant gray sculptural structure in the distance. From the overhead view, I'm not surprised that pilots during the Pakistan Civil War mistook it for a ruin, based on its color, shape, and the way it is set apart from everything else. The overall plan is diamond in shape, yet comprised of cylindrical and rectangular towers pierced with varying geometric shapes. The walls have alternating concrete and marble, with the texture of the formwork still visible on the concrete, like at the Salk Institute. Wendy Lesser puts the plan in an easy-to-understand description, which I am guessing is only possible if you visit. The octagonal assembly hall is at the center of the diamond, with the mosque at a higher level somewhere overhead. Offices and chambers line the outer walls, set off from inner functions by an ambulatory that runs around the entire building. The assembly building is not one that is easily described in words. Lesser does a really great job in You Say to Brick, but of course I was looking at photographs and plans while I was reading her words, so it kind of all came together for me. And I promise I will get some stuff on Instagram to make it a little bit more clear. At the assembly building, the experience inside and outside do not match up. Kahn's buildings are static works of art, but the drama happens inside, especially here in this 9-story space. Light and shadow are not only seen but felt. The paths you take through the building allow views through uniquely shaped spaces that are different at all times of the day. They rely on the alignment of the sun through geometric openings in the walls, through the glass openings at the roofline, and through interior windows. The 8-sided assembly hall is a tall room, but not tall enough to dwarf its occupants. The ceiling, although made of concrete, was constructed of a lightness that makes it seem to float in place. Architect Juarez describes the building as a community, a place where people come together to discuss one thing. Quote, "When souls unite, then it becomes a spiritual place. He, meaning Kahn, was concerned with the soul or mind. Mind can be analyzed, soul cannot. It is more mysterious. True to the mysterious nature of the soul, Kahn designed the mosque on the 3rd floor, not accessible or visible from the exterior. Flights of steps through a crescent moon-shaped space lead you there, enhancing the drama of the journey through the space. We've perhaps touched on the 3 elements necessary for a successful design before. And this may sound familiar, according to 1st century AD Roman architect Vitruvius Pollio, I don't know how to say this. Pollio. I would say Pollio, but that's probably not right. That's why everyone says Vitruvius, probably. Is right. Translated by 17th century Englishman Henry Wotton. So, 3 elements necessary for a successful design are firmness, commodity, and delight. Lesser describes the feeling experienced at the assembly building in her book, which counters the disorientation felt within the space, as wonder. She and Kahn's son Nathaniel were lucky enough to experience this building on a much deeper level, I'm sure, by, being able to talk to these architects like Samshul Waras and other people who actually get to work in this space every day. So Wendy Lesser says that she would describe this feeling when you're in the space as wonder. And if you associate that, or you think of it in context with the firmness, commodity, delight, wonder and delight I would put those in the same camp. Firmness, or physical strength, secured the building's structural integrity. Utility provided an efficient arrangement of spaces and mechanical systems to meet the functional needs of its occupants. And Venustas, the aesthetic quality associated with the goddess Venus, imparted style, proportion, and visual beauty. So that little bit about firmness, commodity, and delight, I found on a really great article on the University of Chicago's website. But it's just about Vitruvius and these the three elements. So the assembly building clearly embodies all 3. Wendy Lesser puts it this way, quote, "Whoever you are, it will speak to you." And I think that's perfect. I also think there are very few architects who are able to convey a poetic dialogue with space that Kahn could.
That's true. I agree.
Oh, and then this is a fun quote. I know that was a good ending, but I didn't get to say this at the beginning, but I think it's appropriate that I say it now. There's a quote by Kahn that says, "I just want to make my last demand in reverence to the work of what has been done by architects of the past. What was has always been. What is has always been. What will be has always been. Such is the nature of beginning."
Yeah.
I love that.
He had a lot of great quotes.
He really did.
Yeah.
Which is why I find it hard to fault him for his life. I mean, it's funny because Frank Lloyd Wright did the same thing, right? And he was just kind of a dick.
Right.
But Louis Kahn was like, I feel like he transcended, like he was so far beyond anything. And yeah, Frank Lloyd Wright, he was doing stuff nobody else had done either, but there was just that ego.
Right.
And when I said this when we were talking about the Salk, there's that bit in the beginning of My Architect where Nathaniel talks to Philip Johnson, and Johnson just loves Kahn. He goes, "Frank Lloyd Wright was too cantankerous to love. Mies van der Rohe, you couldn't talk to at all. Corbusier was mean, but Lou, there was a man." That's so perfect. There was a man. He had so much love.
That's right.
Like, he made people cry, like this adorable Bangladeshi architect Juarez, when Nathaniel's talking to him, like he just starts crying when he's moved to tears over what Kahn has done for his country.
Yeah. I mean, that's really significant. Amazing. Yeah. So Kahn remained in a relationship with Harriet, his second mistress, until his death in 1974. And as I think we mentioned at the very beginning of the first episode, he was actually on his way back from a trip to Bangladesh when he was found basically dying of a heart attack in the bathroom of the Penn station. And New York. And I do have his original obituary, sort of. It was kind of more like a love letter, written by the New York Times' architecture reviewer, Paul Goldberger, in 1974.
Yeah.
Louis Kahn, whose strong forms of brick and concrete influenced a generation of architects and made him, in the opinion of most architectural scholars, America's foremost living architect, died Sunday evening, apparently of a heart attack, in the Pennsylvania station. He was 73 years old. Among Mr. Kahn's major projects were the master plan for a second capital at Dhaka, East Pakistan, which is now the capital of Bangladesh, the Richards Medical Research Laboratories at University of Pennsylvania, the Kimball Art Museum in Fort Worth, Texas, and the Yale Art Gallery, which was completed in 1951 and was its first major building. Mr. Kahn was returning from India, where he had gone to oversee further work on his partially completed complex of buildings for the Institute of Management at Ahmedabad.
Oh, Ahmedabad. Yeah,
Thank you.
Ahmedabad?
Yeah, that sounds right.
I think you say bod instead of bad.
Bod. Yeah, Ahmedabad.
Okay.
There we go.
Sure.
Ahmedabad. Yeah, there we go. One of the many Kahn works at various stages of development when he died. After a week's absence, he was on his way back to meet his Monday morning class in architecture at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. His body was picked up by the police and taken to the city morgue. Identification was made on a tentative basis through his passport, which showed that he had just returned to the country by way of John F. Kennedy International Airport from London and earlier from Bombay. The passport gave Mr. Kahn's office and home addresses in Philadelphia. The Philadelphia police never notified the architect's wife, the former Esther Virginia Israeli. As time passed without word from her husband, Mrs. Kahn placed calls overseas and finally to the New York police. They disclosed that his body was taken to the medical examiner's office and that they had notified the Philadelphia police. Mr. Kahn was a small man whose white hair and bow tie were often in disarray, but his modest physical appearance was in sharp contrast to the vastness of his influence on architects both in America and abroad. He fit into neither the organic school of Frank Lloyd Wright nor the other major modern movement, the lean, pure European modern of Le Corbusier and Mies van der Rohe, but sought to redefine architecture in a fundamental way for himself. That redefinition for Mr. Kahn involved searching for the essential qualities not of a particular building, but of architecture itself. His somewhat fundamentalist approach led him toward strong, simple, geometric forms and basic materials such as brick and concrete, which he often left in its unfinished state as a better means of expressing the material's nature. So this article goes on for 6 pages. But I do want to say the very last bit, which was another quote from Kahn. It says, "At heart, Mr. Kahn was always a teacher. While he generally avoided discussing his buildings in particular terms, he was fond of repeating a number of observations that he felt helped to explain his approach to architecture. 1, quote, "The sun never knew how great it was till it hit the side of a building reflected his obsession with light and the way he tried to make it a vital part of his architecture."
So one of the things that's interesting and totally true is that light within a Kahn building could almost be considered a building material.
Right.
Because it was so, like,
pivotal.
Whether you see it or feel it or something, like, it could not, his buildings wouldn't be the same without his understanding and use of light.
Yeah.
And not just a window, like the way, like in the Kimball, like the way it bathes the sort of those barrel vaults and it's kind of scooped in from above and then fed down below. And that's for sure a significant player in the Parliament building. The Assembly building.
And one of his last quotes, which kind of defines the way that he felt about his role as an architect, was, "Did the world need the Fifth Symphony before it was written? Did Beethoven need it? He designed it, he wrote it, and the world needed it. Desire is the creation of a new need." So all of Kahn's obituaries listed his wife Esther and his daughter as his survivors,
but not Nathaniel.
None of the other children, right?
Not Anne.
So some people say that all of Kahn's families knew of each other, but never crossed paths until his funeral in 1974. Esther apparently definitely knew about Anne and Harriet, and did not want them at the funeral. She dispatched